One of the first videos I ever made was on Singapore Airlines business class. Since then, I've been to Singapore 8 more times, but only on United. I only flew with Singapore once more a few months ago. Singapore Airlines has built up a reputation as one of the world's best airlines, and today we finally get the opportunity to try out the product once again. This time after flying many other products so that we can really have a good standard to base it on. So use those timestamps below to see those comparisons, while we also discuss the top routes for the airline and country, as well as their new business class, and when we may see that. Singapore has remained one of my favorite world cities. It's all about knowing where to go for the best food, as it's a true crossroads of culture, not just a major economic hub. It's also home to the airport consistently ranked as the best in the world. Singapore Changi Airport could be a destination of its own. I've had 12-hour layovers here and never ran out of things to do. I've debated making a video on Changi Airport and all the activities within it, so let me know below if that's something you'd be interested in. Singapore Airlines, however, is by far the largest carrier here, so they have real estate in multiple terminals. The airport became Singapore's main airport in 1981 as they wanted a location for an airport that wouldn't be encroached by growing urban areas, so they opened it on the former Changi Airbase site, moving the airbase to the previous Singapore International Airport site. The nicest of the terminals is Terminal 2, which was most recently renovated. I can't tell what the scheme is for which Singapore flights are in which terminal, but this terminal seems to host most of Singapore Airlines Asia flights. Although interestingly enough, United's San Francisco flights leave from this terminal. Our flight and the other American and European flights depart from Terminal 3, which you can reach by walking to the train. After spending like 10 minutes in a trance watching the display between outbound immigration booths, I decided to begin my walk. The walking route takes us through the most famous part of the airport, however, the Jewel. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Jewel is the crown achievement of Singapore Changi Airport. If you Google Changi Airport, this is what you're going to find first in the image section. It's essentially just a mall, but it's really a multi-tiered rainforest, a true oasis that calms you in your journey. And considering how easy it is to clear Singapore's immigration, if your layover is more than a couple hours, it's a great place to kill some time. Welcome to Terminal 3. This has long been Singapore Airlines' main terminal, especially during the Terminal 2 renovation. There's separate terminal entrances for each cabin class so that you're closer to your specific check-in counters. It's kind of funny though. The employee remarked that this terminal was much more old and tired. Maybe compared to Terminal 2, but compared to 95% of the world's terminals, this thing's at least 10 times better. Next to the secondary check-in for their first-class suites, there was a business class section. Not sure how they do it, but there's never a line for check-in here. Even when I'm in economy, I walk right up. Probably since the self-serve kiosks are encouraged, but I'm loving how quick we get through this step. Departures is at the back of the terminal, and Singapore's is super easy. For starters, their immigration is 100% automated, both inbound and outbound. They also save the security checkpoints for gate holding areas, so there's no security at this step. Just immigration. But then we're into Changi's Terminal 3, and this place is stunning. Elevated ceilings, tons of natural lighting, and some of the best restaurants. And a lot of luxury brands have flagship-style shops on the concourse, such as Marrakesh's Baka Coffee. When in doubt, however, there's so many cozy places to just relax and enjoy the great ramp views. While the terminal's impressive, the most important stop is the lounge, which has actually been renovated since my last Singapore Airlines video a few years ago. They have two spaces here, the smaller one for Star Alliance Gold passengers and the main one accessible only to Star Alliance business class passengers. They scan you into the correct lounge in the lobby, and then the business class lounge splits into two directions. To the right, the first thing is the bar for the lounge. It was here that I watched PSG absolutely dominate Inter in the UCL finals. This is the simpler portion of the lounge, but it also tends to be quieter, I've found. There's seating in different styles for groups of different sizes, and a smaller buffet for more snacky items. Honestly, this part of the lounge feels a bit more like overflow seating, but it's still crazy nice. I just wish the windows weren't so far. In the other direction, this still looks a bit like it did in our last visit. Going past the customer service desks, the dining option lines the entire left wall, so they scatter different seat styles throughout. There's these more private seats first, better for solo travelers, and after the morning rush, they were a great space to get work done. Most of the rest of the seats are ideal for dining. Some high-topped, some more traditional tables and chairs, but they're loose in case you want to push them together if you've got a bigger group. My go-to seating in this lounge, however, is at the far end, where you've got tables and booths with better ramp views and plenty of charging outlets. As mentioned, basically the entire east wall is the dining options in sections. There's a whole section for beverages with soft drinks and a self-serve beer and wine, with the other end being a similar setup but with salads and desserts. But the main meat, pun intended, is found in the central section. There's a mix of chef-prepared food and self-serve food. There's chefs making eggs on one side, and then the other side was the signature noodles, either wonton soup, fishball soup, or laksa, depending on time of day. Between those is the self-serve section with the dim sum and other steamed goodies that Singapore is known for. The last bit is the hot drink island. Removed from the buffet, an island with all the tea, coffee, and water is found amongst the seats. There's two little corners left of the lounge, however. The first is this room across from the buffet. If I remember correctly, this was reserved for first-class passengers when I was here in 2022, presumably as they were refreshing the first-class spaces. It definitely feels more private, even though it's no less crowded than the rest of the lounge. They do also have shower suites, although they can book up, so I'd suggest booking it early, as you may have an hour wait or more before you can get in. They do have good amenities inside, however. And lastly, if you have a long stay here, there's a quiet room in the back. The doors stay closed, but you can grab one of those lounge chairs to catch up on sleep while you charge your devices as well. They even have blankets, pillows, and eye masks available for you to borrow. I had a great Singaporean spread of dim sum and laksa, plus the Peking duck and my all-time favorite TWG vanilla bourbon before it was time to make my way to the gate. Remember, we've gone through immigration, but no security yet. That's because all of Singapore's gates are independent holding areas and you pass through security to enter each of them, so leave time for that. But after that, they separate cabin classes and scan boarding passes so that you're boarded and just wait in the holding area until they call your group. Fair warning, however, there's no restrooms in these areas, so use that before going through security. We got great views of our aircraft outside from here, however. Singapore Airlines uses the A350 as their main long-haul aircraft. They do have a sizable 787 fleet, but it remains mostly within Asia as its cabin isn't quite as posh. When Singapore announced that they were going to use A350s to reach New York, however, they needed to reconfigure the cabin a bit. They needed less people, so it was lighter and could take more fuel, so they got rid of the entire economy cabin, leaving it with only business and premium economy. Most of their A350s rock 42 business class seats, 24 premium economy seats, and the rest being economy, but these ones have 67 business class seats and 94 premium economy, 25 more business and 70 more premium economy seats. This is one of those aircraft, known as the A350ULR, or Ultra Long Range. As these are used for such long flights, the all-premium cabin's nice, as no one wants to be in economy for that long. And if you want this experience, these aircraft are only found on 3 routes from Singapore. New York and Newark see the aircraft, as they were the main motivation for the aircraft, and one of the 2 daily San Francisco flights, as it's their most successful US route and sees so much premium demand. I flew this cabin in December to Saigon, which is why you'll see a couple shots with the wreath above the windows, but I was reminded how spacious it feels. In a 1-2-1 configuration, it's in a style where all seats are created equal, being the same distance from the aisle and window, although that does create an odd bed mode that we'll see later. I'll also add that I believe the seat is unique in the industry, a true one of a kind. If anything, it kinda reminds me of Finnair's business class seat, but like a distant cousin. Our seat will be 15A, which is in the forward cabin of the business class section. The seat itself is crazy wide enough for 2 people in theory to sit side by side. Along the aisles, an armrest with seat controls and a second headset plug for when you're in bed mode. Then is the space to the side. Not exactly a counter, but there is space with a storage slot next to the reading light and charging ports. There was 2 windows seemingly at every seat, besides the last one before the bulkheads. And then the side counter, which has an enclosed cubby that was easy to forget things in, and a giant tray table that pulls out of the side there. In front of you is a unique setup, with a large TV, although it's not touchscreen, requiring the remote, but then a more enclosed storage cubby above a little shelf and mirror behind the little cover. This setup becoming one of Singapore's flagship looks. Below that, as mentioned, is a bit strange, with the footwell being offset from center despite the seat facing forward. There is some storage below that which is big enough for a backpack. Fortunately, they removed the center overhead bins, which makes the cabin feel extra roomy. Unfortunately, however, there aren't any overhead air vents, although the cabin was kept at a good temperature for the most part. Amenities is another area where carriers like this thrive. We had noise-canceling headsets and a water in the side cubby waiting for us. We also had this accent pillow, which wasn't good for much more than lumbar support. Don't worry, the actual bedding is elsewhere. You'll see. Although we did get a nice blanket. Then, hot towels and pre-departure beverages were passed out, and I took the Bellini, basically grapefruit and champagne. The strange bit is that we were given slippers, socks, and eye mask, but not amenity kits. The first page of the menu showed that there was a few things available on request, but so far, that's the first touch that doesn't feel ultra premium if Singapore's looking to revamp. I did ask for the amenity kit in flight, and they delivered this nice Lalabo kit. It's fairly thin considering we already got socks and eye mask, but we also had some nice Lalabo potions in here and a dental kit. It's really all you need, honestly. But the purser saw me filming and also gave me this fun little Singapore Airlines teddy bear. I wonder if he'll be friends with the growing pile of Polaris bears I have at home. Singapore's been a 5-star airline for roughly 20 years. This is because of their excellent hard and soft product, both on board and in the airport. To keep that 5-star rating though, you've got to keep innovating. So in November, Singapore announced nearly $1 billion to be spent on A350 overhauls. All cabins except economy will see renovations. Premium economy has already received its upgrades. The hard product remains the same, but they've elevated the amenity kits and dining options. In business class, we've heard rumors of new cabins since 2014. They were rumored to be getting closed-door business class suites, the first of the kind back then. But it was ahead of its time, as they went a different direction, and then shortly after, Delta and Qatar rolled out new closed-door products. The seats we're now expecting are a new concept, just announced this year. It's actually the same seats that the 777X will eventually have, but since the launch customers have been named as Emirates, Lufthansa, and Qatar, sounds like we'll need to wait about 3 more years before Singapore gets their 777Xs. These delays, however, have given Singapore plenty of time to perfect the new design. These business class seats will be the only ones in the fleet with closing doors, and those doors and walls appear to be tall, as one of the biggest complaints on closed door suites is a lack of privacy due to low walls, like on the Adian seats seen on plenty of carriers like Qatar and Hawaiian. These new seats will fix the 2 biggest issues that people have with the current seats. The seats should be able to recline into a bed rather than needing to flip the seat forward, and the footwell will be directly in front. Although that does mean the seats will alternate between being closer to the aisle and window, differing in privacy, instead of all seats being the same like it is now. While refreshed, it will remain the signature large TV and enclosed storage nooks. We also expect to see wireless charging and Bluetooth connectivity. Currently, none of their A350s have first class, but the A350ULRs have extensive premium capacity with 94 premium and 67 business class seats, and no economy. These are seen only on New York and San Francisco routes as the most premium-heavy long-range markets. And with these refit, these aircraft will sport 1 row of first class for the first time, giving it only 4 seats of the type. This is somewhat shocking to me in an era where most carriers are eliminating first class. Although while the business class retrofit will be seen on all A350s, the first class will only be seen on the ULR variant, giving it 4 seats in first, 70 in business, 58 premium economy, and still no economy. At the moment, they're hoping to have the first renovated A350 by mid-2026, with the first being the non-ULR. The first ULR with first class isn't expected until early 2027, but at the pace of the industry, I'd give each of those estimates at least an extra year. But regardless of all the new products announced recently, this could be the one I'm most excited for, even if I'm apparently in the minority that enjoys the current seats. Considering our 10 p.m. departure, they wasted no time getting the meals out for us so we could sleep. They took our orders before departure so they could have them ready, but the menus handed out presented 3 meals for the flight, which is one of the world's longest. There's obviously extensive beverages, but also a 4-course dinner service with multiple main course choices and lunch service before arrival. Plus, we were offered a mid-flight a la carte menu of food and snacks to tie us over. But I'd suggest pre-ordering your meals as they can run out, especially on these ULR aircraft with so many passengers. I find it kinda unpremium that they served us from the carts instead of just walking the selections to the seat. But I don't think that's a reflection of the crew, who was genuinely some of the best crew members I've had ever. I mean, I was addressed by name as Mr. Shea every time they saw me. It may be the only business class where the flight attendants address you properly. Plus, they were incredibly attentive to the cabin and took excellent care of us with a smile the whole time. Part of that was suggesting the start of the Portuguese red wine, and who am I to say no? And if you know Singapore Airlines, you know that it doesn't take long for their signature satay service. Satay is a staple in Singapore, and it's how they start the first meal of their long-haul flights. Once they collected the satay canapé, however, they properly made up the dining set, with tablecloth and all, considering the satay is meant to keep us occupied while they cook and prep the main courses. Another thing that feels very non-premium is having only one single option for the starter. It was delicious, but even the US and European carriers that get hated on have 2 to 3 choices. We all got the marinated prawn salad with cucumber and fennel. Unfortunately, they ran out of my first choice for dinner, but it all sounded good, so I wasn't all that upset. I ended up with the second choice, which was the lamb biryani. The spiced rice had cucumber, tomato, and red onion cooked in, and topped with curry lamb pieces, and I cannot begin to tell you how tasty this dish was, although maybe a bit heavy on the rice. When they collected the trays, they had all 4 dessert options on the cart and told us to take our pick. I decided that the ice cream cake sounded too good to pass up, but Southeast Asia also has some of the world's best fruit, so I got that too. The experience wrapped up with coffee or tea, and I wanted tea, but told the purser to pick his favorite, and he suggested TWG's 1837 black tea. I wasn't exactly looking for black tea, but it was too good to turn down, and I really appreciate the partnership between Singapore Airlines and TWG tea, one of my favorite airlines and my favorite tea. Bedtime now. It was around midnight in Singapore, or around 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and I was gassed. On this trip, I flew from San Francisco to Delhi to Kathmandu to Singapore and back to San Francisco in all about 36 hours. Singapore has one of the best beds in the skies, but also possibly the strangest. For starters, if we hold the recline button, you'll see that it gets you in a fairly comfortable reclined position with leg rest up, but definitely not lie flat. If you're looking for a bed, it means you have to flip the seat forward, meaning you have to get up to make the bed. Fortunately, unless it's during meal services, the crew can typically help with the turn-down service. There's a handle here on the back, and when you pull it, the seat falls forward to make a really nice-sized surface. Then you just have to fold out the little piece so there's no gap between the main seat and the footwell. When they clean the cabin for the next flight, they actually attach a fresh mattress pad to the seat, so once you fold it down, the mattress pad's already in place. And they throw 2 real bed pillows behind the seat, so those are basically in place once the seat comes down as well. There's also a seatbelt strap. The main seatbelt's kind of the thick airbag style, so that gets stowed when the bed's deployed, so you pop this thing into the same buckle. Then, that same blanket at the seat becomes our comforter. And I actually found it to be crazy comfy, but just a bit small. I found that if I tossed and turned, it would just fall off, kinda narrow. I gotta be honest though, behind United's Polaris with their bedding, this may be my favorite business class bed in the sky. The only weird bit is looking at where the feet go. The seat faces forward, but the feet don't. This makes the comforter fit the bed a bit weird, considering it's a rectangle, but the seat is not. Just like Finnair. What I've found is that it still makes a comfortable bed, but you have to align yourself with the footwell instead of squaring it off with the seat shell. It feels a bit unnatural at first, but before long it's totally normal. The footwell isn't huge, but I was able to sleep on my back and my side. I just wish the privacy was a bit better in these seats. Considering we've got like 12 hours in flight still, however, I'm shutting off the light and my eyes, and I'll see y'all in a hot minute. Good morning/afternoon, depending on your time zone. But look, we've got sun. I slept like a baby, but set an alarm so that I wasn't awake all night on arrival. But I did book this as a round-trip journey, and on the flight from San Francisco back to Singapore, I slept for all but 2 hours in this seat. It was a great time to explore their mid-flight snack options now. They did have a stock in the galley if you wanted to grab items from the cart, but you could also order from the menu as long as the seatbelt sign wasn't on. They said I could get as many a la carte items as I wished, but I chose the Singapore seafood noodle option, known as the fried hoki and mee, which are Singapore-style noodles with prawn, calamari, and pork. It was of course amazing, and I got water and coffee to keep me awake until I was home. It was time to freshen up after that rest, however, and the A350 lavatories are fresh, although not typically huge. Modern finishings, including a touchless trash chute, made for a clean space, but they also provided us with some amenities like lotion, perfume, and facial mist, plus real hand towels if you'd prefer that over paper towels. That's like a first-class level perk, and the drawers have additional freebies like dental kits and shaving kits, which is why it's not the end of the world to not have amenity kits. As with any of the carriers in this class, Singapore flies to so many unique destinations and has so many long-haul flights that a solid entertainment system is a must. We know of Emirates' world-famous ICE system, so how does this hold up to that? There's pages from the home screen at the bottom to find the movies, TV, music, or flight info. They've got a great interface, but the screen itself isn't touchscreen, so you have to use the remote, which takes a bit of getting used to. The movie selection, however, is strong. The categories are a bit different than the typical genres, but once you find the correct group of titles, the list just goes on and on and on. It's how I keep up to date with all the award nominees, and also why I'm glad to have the favorites option to find things easier. I also appreciate the fresh collection of TV shows, with most of them having full seasons. But the rarity these days is the live TV. I'm not sure why this went away other than probably just the cost to maintain it, but it's a good way to keep up with major news or sporting events if you're on a plane without streaming. Although, unless you're using the remote, it's got this great flight progress screen, which is great to check in with. Singapore also offers Wi-Fi on their flights. The best part is that if you're in first or business class, or a KrisFlyer member in premium economy, you just need to enter your name and seat number to unlock free internet connection for the full flight. It wasn't the fastest, but I ain't complaining about free Wi-Fi. About 2.5 hours from San Francisco, it was time for our final meal of the flight. Where Singapore Airlines and especially the flight crew get major brownie points is the meal selection. If you recall, they ran out of my main choice for the dinner service. Because of this, they made sure to come to me first for the second meal, so they could assure I got my choice for at least one of the meals. I've had this happen increasingly more recently, on at least 10 to 15 flights in the last year, and United is the only other carrier that came to me first for that second meal. So how did I use this perk? Well, like the first meal, there was still only one appetizer selection. Come on, Singapore. But it was still dang good. It was a simple chicken Caesar with pickled onions and smoked croutons, and the flavors were solid. The Indian option of main course sounded good, but I wanted to try the chef's specialty, the braised lamb shoulder. Not only was the lamb cooked surprisingly well for an airplane meal, but it came with my daily dose of veggies. Plus, that San Franciscan in me was all over that garlic bread. I then wrapped it up with one last vanilla bourbon tea to go with the chocolate parfait and brown sugar cookie. And the amazing purser gave me an extra packet of each of the teas I had on board to bring home with me. I'm sure TWG cashes in on this Singapore partnership. I mean, that's why I love it so much, and I'm sure I'm not alone there. I spent 2 years tracking down vanilla bourbon around the world before finally finding it in some small mall kiosk in Penang, Malaysia. Singapore Airlines' history is fascinating, and really explains the history of Singapore itself. Their story begins with the launch of Malayan Airlines in 1937 in a joint collaboration between Singapore and British firms with the goal to create a regional carrier for the Commonwealth. Due to Wern's Air Service, another regional carrier in the area, Malayan was unable to launch their flights on the relatively busy air routes between Singapore and British Malaya. World War II further delayed the launch of flights, but also led to Wern Air Service ceasing operations, leaving a gap in the market. So finally, 10 years after the foundation, Malayan Airlines first flew as a chartered service from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur in April 1947, followed by Ipoh and Penang. By the way, Ipoh is home to my favorite coffee in the world. Now that they were flying, they used assistance from other airlines under the British Commonwealth to help their growth. BOAC, which became British Airways, and Qantas largely provided the needed technical assistance. Plus, they joined IATA. With a fleet of DC-3s, Malayan Airlines went public in 1957, but shortly after, Malaya, Singapore, Sabah, and Sarawak separated to form Malaysia in 1963, so the airline officially became Malaysian Airways. 3 years later, Singapore separated from Malaysia, so the airline changed names again, this time to Malaysia Singapore Airlines, or MSA, and began working on certification for US flights in 1970. In 1972, MSA ceased operations, splitting into two separate carriers, Singapore Airlines and Malaysian Airlines. Malaysian Airlines wanted to focus on domestic growth, but Singapore Airlines wanted to focus internationally, so they took MSA's 707s and 737s and retained all the international routes from Singapore. They then worked with a local advertising company to create a worldwide brand, and the first step was the sarong kebaya uniforms for female flight attendants, which are the same uniforms they maintain to this day, and they were dubbed the Singapore Girls. They also changed the call sign to SIA, and changed the livery to the blue-yellow livery that basically remains to this day, with only slight tweaks. After MSA's demise, Singapore expanded basically overnight, launching Indian and Asian routes and acquiring 747s. The US, however, was their biggest wishlist item, but negotiations hit a snag in '76. Singapore had cargo rights to Los Angeles for a couple years, but no passenger routes. They applied to operate the routes via Tokyo as it would be the most lucrative and could also help with Fifth Freedom services. But US authorities thought this would affect profits on Pan Am. So they countered with Singapore needing to fly the same route as Pan Am so they could monitor head-to-head numbers. So in September 1977, Singapore first flew to the US, from Singapore to Hong Kong, Guam, Honolulu, and finally San Francisco, eventually dropping Guam and Honolulu once aircraft range allowed. The route was assigned the prestigious Flight Number 1 call sign, which it maintained until 2022, when Singapore, Hong Kong, San Francisco was retired, when Hong Kong disallowed transit passengers. London is the other pride and joy of the airline. In 1977, British Airways and Singapore shared a Concorde to serve London to Singapore flights via Bahrain, but the flight kept getting shut down on different flight paths due to noise complaints from different nations. In 1981, Singapore completed the first non-stop flight between London and Singapore. It was also the first commercial flight to arrive at the new Singapore Changi Airport, and with the new airport and 747-400s, the airline boomed across Europe. In 2000, the airline joined Star Alliance as they tried to grow past San Francisco in North America, adding Los Angeles and Newark in 2004, which immediately became the world's longest flight. They used specially configured A340-500s on these routes that had no economy seats so that they could maximize the range. Then, deliveries of the A380s in 2007 allowed for the ultra-premium offering on their top routes. There were some European routes, but all one-stop US flights saw the A380 at one point or another, San Francisco, LA, and JFK. As the A340s were too expensive to operate, however, they were retired in 2013, along with Newark and Los Angeles routes. Singapore then filed for Fifth Freedom rights through Australia, but was denied. They ended up sending the LA flights through Tokyo and New York flight through Frankfurt, which still remain today. And finally, in 2018, Singapore received the A350ULR as a replacement to the A340. This plane also had no economy class and allowed the resumption of New York services, but since then, COVID brought the airline's first ever loss. As of 2022, however, pre-pandemic levels had been reached and surpassed. And as of their most recent annual report, the airline has reached record profits. Hence why we see new cabins, and no doubt more long-haul routes. I'm gunning for Sao Paulo and Buenos Aires via South Africa. What do you think we'll find with this new money? 3 years later, we are back with Singapore Airlines. But how do we feel? I think I can confidently say that Singapore is still towards the top of the list. I know Qatar keeps winning awards, but there's beef there. They win those awards for the Q suites, but they consistently rob you of that experience at the last minute, like on our journey to Brazil on this channel last year. We'll have to try the Q suites again, but there's something to be said about this Singapore product. The fact that amongst wide bodies in their fleet, the worst seat that you can get is still the best seat that Turkish has. Singapore also rocks a one-of-a-kind business class seat on this aircraft. It's a bit funky in a few ways that we only see on Singapore Airlines, but it's still one of my favorite seats out there. A ton of space, a ton of storage, a ton of privacy. So what if you need to stand up to make the bed? They make it easy and comfy. They shine even brighter, however, in their soft product. From the moment I was on board, I was greeted by the purser with name. Mr. Shea, can I make the bed for you? Mr. Shea, good morning. Can I prepare you a breakfast? Not only was the crew incredibly attentive, they were personable. I mean, when the purser realized I was taking photos, he brought me a teddy bear and extra tea, which he said would help the photos look better, and it did. Singapore has great success in their US routes for the most part. They're the 8th largest Asian carrier in the US, although no US destinations rank top 15 from Singapore, mostly because they can't send as many daily flights as they can to places like Beijing, Jakarta, and Sydney. But the US remains Singapore's top partner for imports and exports, with electronics and telecommunications being Singapore's biggest exports and industry. Which explains why San Francisco, as the world's tech hub, maintains the most available seats between the US and Singapore, with 4 daily flights and a rumor of a 5th, although most likely from United. If you're going to India or connecting to other Southeast Asian destinations, you can find great deals on Singapore's business class, which is great because the biggest drawback is that it can be pricey. But it's one of the few cases where you genuinely get where you pay for. This was only my 3rd flight in Singapore's business class, but I still rank it in the top 3 all-around business class products, and it seems like the public agrees. Typically ranking it at the top of their list amongst Qatar, Emirates, and Etihad. Where do you rank Singapore's business class product? Let me know if you've flown Singapore and what your best memory from the carrier is, and until next Sunday, safe travels. I'll see y'all next time.